Hello, everybody. This is the first podcast of artificial intelligence and cybersurgery. My name is Professor Andrew Gumbs, and our first guest is actually going to be my co-host, Dr. Vincent Grasso. So I'm going to start by interviewing him. So this is very exciting. I'm just going to give a little story. I know Dr. Grasso through my brother-in-law, and also in the fact that we were both attended Yale. Dr. Grasso was the advanced surgical fellow at Yale when I was actually a medical student in my final years. And Dr. Grasso has been a big innovator in artificial intelligence. He's worked for literally decades on computers, and I'm very excited for you to get to know him better. He's been published and featured in articles and on video and on the news, and we'll actually get into that a little bit later. So, Dr. Grasso, Vincent.
Yeah, please call me Vincent.
Yeah, it's great to finally start this. We're very excited about this because I'm the editor-in-chief of a journal called Artificial Intelligence Surgery, and Dr. Grasso is actually the social media editor. So this is our idea to get people a little bit more exposure to our journal. So Dr. Grasso, please, could you tell us a little bit about your time at Yale? Because that was a very exciting time. It was really like the inflection curve of minimally invasive surgery was really exploding. Laparoscopy was everything anyone was really talking about, and you were really at the forefront. So if you could tell us a little bit about your time at Yale and maybe your time at Mount Sinai.
Sure.
Great.
No, it's fantastic, and thanks for inviting me to be part of your exciting journal. And the universe is an interesting place where you meet people and you hear about them, and then you wind up, working with them. So this is exciting for us. And just to wind it back a little bit, I was a surgical resident in New York at the Mount Sinai Manhattan program, and my chief resident at the time was your brother-in-law, Dr. Scott Hannon. So he was 2 years ahead of me, and so we spent time together, in Manhattan, through our residencies. And when I left, an interest anecdotally. I wound up being the first assistant on a very early Lapnicin in 1992 when I was an intern.
Wow, very early.
Pretty early in Manhattan, and the attending got yelled at that he wasn't supposed to do it, and it was an early case. But I was very lucky because I practiced learning how to tie intracorporally, and I was able to suture internally because I was interested in it, and it was fascinating for me.
It's mind blowing because I was still in college at that point, studying archaeological studies. So you were really, ahead of the curve. So just to be very clear, the patient did fantastically well.
Patient did fantastic. Yeah, they were discharged, and it was. But we didn't do another Lapnicin for like 4 years because it was still kind of early in the program. So when I left, when I was a chief resident, I had been exposed in that year to the Department of Surgery at Yale, where you were, because of the cool techie stuff they were doing. And they had a U.S. Surgical Center of Excellence. There were probably, I think, 6 or 7 around the country. And Yale's Department of Surgery was a U.S. Surgical Center of Excellence. And they had, they had a NASA Commercial Space Center there, which was interesting. And as a techie guy, as I was looking for a fellowship in advanced minimally invasive surgery, Yale had, the techie side, and it had certainly the gravitas of being a surgical center of excellence. And that's when I went up there.
Just to point out for the younger people watching this, U.S. Surgical eventually became Covidien, which, as of course is now Medtronic. But did you know, I always wondered, or I never verified this, but U.S. Surgical really, I think, became famous because of their automatic staplers. Do you actually know where that technology initially was developed and why?
I'm not really sure. I mean, when we were at Yale, they had this kind of widget that moved move the needle kind of back and forth in this long, actuator.
But like the GIA staplers.
Yeah, the staplers and then the
So at least what the people told me, I never verified this. Those were actually developed in the former Soviet Union.
Oh wow! Okay, didn't know that.
So the techs could actually do thoracotomies, like out, I think, in no man's land, like Siberia, sure. And they could actually treat patients with tuberculosis by doing the automatic staplers. And apparently, 2 guys from U.S. Surgical actually put these, I guess, in their suitcases on their way out of the country, and then created. Again, I cannot verify this, but that was the word on the street back at Yale back in those days.
I mean, it's a lot of interesting things came out of the Eastern Bloc countries, right? They had less regulatory constraints than we do here, right. So it was the 90s was an interesting time. There was, really, centers of excellence pushing the surgical envelope into minimally invasive surgery. AI really wasn't a hot topic, but machine learning and a lot of the visual aids and computer imaging and all that stuff was all percolating, and that was at the epicenter at our space center where you were when you were doing your training. So
right.
That's
so talk a little bit more about that. It was at the time, I didn't quite appreciate what you guys had actually created, how much funding you had. I mean, were you funded by NASA?
Yeah, we were in the actual, the name of the organization was the Yale University NASA Commercial Space Center for Medical Informatics and Technology Applications, CSC MITA. Okay. And it was, Ron Merrill was, your department chair. And he had recruited Dr. Rick Satava, who was a Army colonel surgeon, but also a technology visionary. And he was at DARPA. He was the Defense Science Office program manager at DARPA. So he brought, when he came to Yale, and he was the director of the Space Center, he brought all of his techie collaborators and strategic partners to the table. And brought them up to the department. And it was based out of, the 40 Temple Street office across the street from the New Haven Hotel, where we actually had I think on the 3rd floor, there were surgical suites and recovery rooms for patients getting lap choles, not in the hospital. They were being done in this cool ambulatory center where they were going home. It was, kind of groundbreaking at that time. So, we had the technology piece, we had the cool clinical surgical piece. And Rick and I actually brought a book to show you. This was, Rick was the editor of a cybersurgery Wiley publication that talked about. So this came out in like 97. This talked about all the things that we've seen over the past 20 years that we've taken for granted now, but it was all kind of illuminated in his cybersurgery, publication.
Well, because of that book, actually, we decided to mix the name of the journal, Artificial Intelligence Surgery, and that book, Cybersurgery, for the name of this podcast, right? Artificial Intelligence, Cyber and Cybersurgery. Now, Rick Satava, Dr. Satava, I remember, was a very, and still is a very intimidating fellow, had a lot of gravitas. Yeah. And he always had this aura about him. And I remember I had very few conversations with him because he wasn't the type of guy that you could have small talk with. And I remember asking him about, his past. And one of the only phrases I remember him saying to me was, "It's classified." Yeah. It was, it was.
Yeah, he had he had a very deep insights and knowledge about, cutting edge technologies through his world at DARPA. And, he's a serious guy, right? So he was, trained in the military, surgeon and really an evangelist for, the kind of technologies that we see playing around now. But spending time with him there, during my stay was very, very rewarding. And he was very supportive of our crazy projects to Mount Everest and everything else that we did. So
before you tell us more about that trip to Everest, which was, just, so far ahead of its time, just for anyone listening who doesn't know, could you say what DARPA stands for?
Yeah, DARPA is the Defense Advanced Project Research Agency. They invented the internet. They invented, they funded and fund lots of cutting edge projects that are way ahead of their time. Many of them don't go anywhere because they're so advanced, right? They're test beds for future things. And in fact, I was introduced by Dr. Satava at Medicine Meets Virtual Reality in 1998 in January in San Diego, where he was the he was the host, and he introduced me to one of his researchers that he funded, a brilliant researcher by the name of Kristen, and we became partners when I finished my my Yale training and my surgical practice in a little startup that I had. But for this conversation, why it was so interesting is, DARPA funded her and her company in the early 90s to develop something called tactical audio. And it was the ability of moving a surgical instrument like a needle through space to go from point A to point B, for example, doing a liver biopsy. How do you move that instrument? How do you move the trocar, the needle into the body so that you don't wind your way through the liver and slash everything up? What's the minimum, what's the trajectory that's optimal? And she connected all that to audio. So it's just like a fighter pilot locks in on target and gets audio.
Just like,
yeah, you stay on the trajectory. So you had optical and you had audio feedback and, haptic feedback and all these things that we take for granted in video gaming was very early. So Rick funded a lot of really interesting early stuff.
Well, speaking of being ahead of your time, or things that were really early, I mean, with the COVID pandemic, of course, we all know that telemedicine has exploded. But I mean, I was blown away. You showed me some of you were interviewed for this on what TV show again was that?
Yeah, we were live at Everest on the day Frank Sinatra died. We were on the Today Show with Matt Lauer. When he was before he got kind of kicked off the program, but he this is May 1998.
I mean, you're doing telemedicine from Everest in the 90s. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
It was really, it was interesting. We were able to set up at Base Camp Mount Everest, basically a MASH unit, right? A hospital MASH unit, a clinic. And we were using the Inmarsat satellites over the Indian Ocean to move data, video, telephone, right? Voice, video, and text images through that connection to Yale New Haven Hospital and Walter Reed Hospital in real time. And it's, you may not believe me, but I actually was doing real time stress tests with a non-invasive cardiac output device in real time and 2D echoes, real time, at 128K. So you'd say, well, 128K, what does that even mean?
I can't remember.
Remember in the old days, the little modems that you had on your computer, they were 56,000, they were 56K. They ran at that bit rate. Yeah. So right now you have in your, in your apartment, 100 megabytes of data flowing back and forth. So this was, 128,000, not 100 million. And, we did it for a month. It was really, and Rick, the DARPA funded it in part, and we had AT&T pick up the telephone costs, and we had a whole bunch of strategic partners. But it was early. It was very early, and, doing pulmonary function tests and Holter monitors and blood analysts with an iStat device, on the spot. I mean, was very futuristic.
You're coming up on the 25th anniversary. What is that in next year? It'll be the 25th anniversary?
Yeah, I guess it'll be, yeah. It's 25 years ago doing telemedicine seamlessly.
Well, it just occurred to me that I'm going to have you do a special edition on telemedicine for the 25th anniversary of that. Absolutely, no? Well,
maybe I've been invited back to go do some stuff back in Nepal, so maybe we can do an advanced trip over there. They have nice hospitals.
Fantastic.
They'd be very happy for you to go and teach them some new procedures. When we were there, we spent about a week in their teaching hospital teaching them basic laparoscopic surgery, right? So diagnostic laparoscopy, and that was early. We donated equipment. that was a very nice part of that project. So they'd be very happy to have you come and help out.
No, of course, that'd be amazing. Now, you also, I believe, went to other countries when you were a fellow at Yale.
Yeah, we did. Basically, what I kind of did, I took the Yale, the concept that we had, the surgical center of excellence there, and we went to Bolivia and Uganda, taught basic laparoscopy, donated equipment, and then we had one whole day symposia on telemedicine and medical informatics, and we take for granted being at, you were at Yale, you're a triple Yale guy, which is very rare. We take for granted the places that we trained at. Then you go down to Bolivia to a small community hospital, and when would they ever even be exposed to the things that we take for granted in our fancy hospital systems? So that was really rewarding. So we did stuff in Nepal and Cambodia and Uganda, and they're all really well trained, very smart, hardworking people, right? They train in our books, they read our textbooks. You know better than I do. The surgeons over there are really well trained and motivated to help their people.
Well, of course. I mean, they not only they learn it in their language, then they learn it in English. They learn just like that from our textbooks. They go to international conferences. They read international published journals. I'm always impressed by that. For obvious reasons. And
they don't get paid. They're not paid $100,000 a month, right? Being a surgeon in Uganda.
Yeah.
But luckily, the technology has gotten good that we can reach those people through our and you could be a teleconsultant, right? You could log into a procedure going on in one of those hospitals with an internet connection. And
there's actually that company by one of our board members called Proximi. I'm probably
Proximi.
Yeah, which is that's exactly what they do, right? They enable the connection so that if there's a surgeon somewhere having a little problem, they can connect with an expert who can draw right on the screen and give them a little bit of help. And it's
sure.
I mean, I found out about her on a TED Talk, and I was very impressed.
Yeah, no,
and we'll have to have her on the podcast.
Sure,
one of these days.
Yeah, no, it's a good time for that.
So after your time at Yale, actually, that reminds me, you also did the Top Gun program while you were there.
Yeah, I was. So when I graduated my surgical residency in July 1, I was in New Haven. I actually started working with Butch Rosser, who had, he had a very good idea about bringing to surgical training, especially if you're going to be suturing, in a minimally invasive manner, you had to develop some new skills, right? Tying knots on the end of two long trocars is different than using your fingers. And he took the insights from the Top Gun program for fighter pilots, where they go through a kind of structured training program, right? And you break it down into its components. Any technique that you learn can be broken down into its subcomponents. And he had, it was a cool program at Yale where, he took general surgeons and he took them through this boot camp to teach them how to do techniques really well before you started going into humans and suturing. And so that's where I started. I started in the Top Gun program. And then when I met Dr. Satava and I presented to him this concept of going to Everest and doing all the technology stuff I was working on, I got traded actually from the minimally invasive department into the commercial space center. And that's how I wound up doing both of those things. But
I remember when I started residency, I mean, my first day of residency, they took us to that Temple Street office, and we did the Top Gun. I remember it was one of the most difficult things I had ever done.
Yeah, it's what I liked about it was really very helpful. I mean, so not all of us are ambidextrous, right? So you do things with your dominant hand. But one of the cool things that I had in the Top Gun program was, you had a trocar and there was a little a little bowl of lima beans, and you got to pick the lima bean up and move it into a cup, and drop it in, right? Not drop it in a small cup.
You're timed.
And
with
you're
everything.
timed, and you start. Your brain isn't used to depth perception in that way.
And we have to give people a little visual on this.
Yeah, that's true.
Bush Rosser played for the University of Miami, was it?
I think Mississippi. I think he was a Mississippi guy.
He was one of the largest human beings I've ever seen in my life. I mean, he was a linebacker or something. He was massive man. I mean, tall and wide, very imposing character.
Yeah, big guy. I mean,
and this guy would be yelling at you while you're doing the Top Gun thing, and
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of people went through that program, and there's and now I think it was picked up by Sages. So,
yes, I mean that's exactly what I'm getting at it, and it's called FLS. I mean, just like you said, take things for granted. Now it's a standardized thing. You have to get a certificate and everything. And I mean, I was doing it, before I even started.
You were there early.
You don't realize what you have at the time, but it was incredible.